Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA greats against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names and sometimes compare players from different positions. Lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, for example, due to their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do comparisons between not just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and/or similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 8 different metrics to judge each player. Scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game, both regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game, both regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game, both in regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage, PER, and win shares per 48. Reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks, steals, or defensive box plus minus is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have these stats tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as a top 3 player. The reason I have to count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise you'll get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if you weren't a top 3 player on that team contributing to a championship. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them equivalent to their respective ABA stats and awards. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are included because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 1980s, which is unfair to older players. Playoffs. This category will be defined by how many Eastern Conference Finals or Western Conference Finals and Finals a player has been to, and how many championships they won as a top 3 player on the team. Yes, this is supplementary to the awards category because it also rewards players for making it far in the playoffs, even if they don't necessarily win at all. Totals. This category will be defined by longevity, how many total points, rebounds, assists, and win shares a player has accumulated throughout their career, and rewards a player's durability. After all, a lot of people say the best ability is availability. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I've not watched most of these players live or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. There's no comparing what this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. It'll be strictly based on their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. In the 42nd episode of the series, we take a look at 2 very underrated Hall of Fame centers who were crucial pieces for their respective championship squads. Jack Sikma was a pioneering all-star shooting center who played most of his prime on the Seattle Supersonics, helping lead them to a championship alongside all-star teammates Dennis Johnson and Gus Williams. Zelmo Beaty, the Big Z, is not a household name amongst modern NBA fans, but he was one of the St. Louis Hawks star centers before transitioning to the ABA, where he became the best player on a championship Utah Stars team. So who had the greater career? Let's find out. In the scoring category, although not dominant scorers, both players could be counted on to provide some offensive firepower when their teams needed them. Sikma averaged 15.6 points per game for his career, peaking at 19.6 points per game in 1982, and 14.3 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 22 points per game in 1984. Beaty averaged 17.1 points per game for his career, peaking at 23.6 points per game in 1972, and 17.9 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 23.2 points per game in 1971. Sikma was known for a shot called the Sikma move, where he would pivot and put the ball far behind his head before releasing it, which was difficult to stop. That said, Sikma was never relied upon as the primary scorer for his team, primary scoring duties often being overtaken by his Sonic teammates Gus Williams or Dennis Johnson, although Sikma was a reliable secondary scorer for his team. Beaty, on the other hand, could be relied upon as the primary scorer for his team, particularly the Utah Stars in the ABA, where he led the team in scoring en route to winning the ABA championship alongside his equally underrated teammate Willie Wise. Beaty averaged over 20 points per game in 5 seasons, whereas Sikma never averaged over 20 points per game in any season. So because of Beaty's role in the ABA taking the scoring lead, I'll have to give this category to him. In the rebounding category, it's fairly close as both players were very good rebounders, Zelmo especially given that he was undersized at 6'9". Sikma averaged 9.8 rebounds a game for his career, peaking at 12.7 rebounds per game in 1982, and 9.3 rebounds a game in the playoffs, peaking at 13 rebounds per game in 1983. Beaty averaged 10.9 rebounds a game for his career, peaking at 15.7 rebounds per game in 1971, and 11.9 rebounds a game in the playoffs, peaking at 14.6 rebounds a game in 1971 as well. Although Beaty's numbers look higher on paper, that's also because he played in a faster-paced era in the 1960s and in the ABA. And actually, Sikma and Beaty both had 8 seasons averaging over 10 rebounds a game, so Sikma was no slouch when it came to rebounding either. So I think both Beaty and Sikma were very capable of grabbing double-digit rebounds at any time during their prime. And like I said, Beaty's numbers being slightly inflated, so when you adjust for that, they're actually fairly comparable. So I have to call this category a tie. In the passing category, this one is a little bit more clear-cut. Sikma averaged 3.2 assists per game for his career, peaking at 4.2 a game in 1985, and 2.4 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 5.5 a game in 1983. Beaty averaged 1.5 assists per game for his career, peaking at 2.1 a game in 1968, and 1.7 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 2.5 a game in 1968 as well. Beaty played more in a traditional offensive system where he was often given the ball only to score, whereas Sikma played in an innovative sonic system where everyone shared the ball well and had more ball movement, thus having more opportunities to pass, and thus this category will go to Jack Sikma. In the efficiency and advanced metrics category, Beaty actually beats out Sikma despite the fact that Sikma was quite a solid shooter for his position and era, and this is partly because Beaty did tend to make higher percentage shots closer to the basket as well. Regardless, Beaty wins out in all the advanced metrics, giving him the win here. In the defense category, this one isn't particularly close. Beaty was an okay defender at his position, but he was more valuable as an offensive-focused center, whereas Sikma was possibly more valuable on defense than on offense. Despite only having one all-defensive selection, Sikma actually led the league in defensive win shares twice, and anchored the Sonics' defense in the interior, while Dennis Johnson anchored the defense in the perimeter. Sikma might be one of the most underrated defensive centers ever, and thus this category will easily go to him. In the awards category, Sikma has the championship as a top 3 player on the 1979 Supersonics team, which had 3 players who all had the argument to be the most valuable on that team. Dennis Johnson, Jack Sikma, and Gus Williams all were equally valuable, much like the 2004 Pistons. Not one superstar stood out as being much better than the others. Beaty, on the other hand, was a top superstar in the 1971 Utah Stars championship, although Willie Wise performed very well in the playoffs and had an argument as well. Beaty won the Finals MVP, and despite the fact that Sikma has a few more All-Star appearances, Beaty's Finals MVP and All-ABA selections put him over the edge here. In the playoffs category, Sikma reached 2 NBA Finals and 1 Western Conference Finals and won a championship. Normally a pretty impressive resume, but Beaty reached an astounding 6 Western Conference Finals in addition to 2 ABA Finals, winning a championship as well. Beaty's playoff resume is surprisingly impressive given how few people know about him, and thus this one will go to Zelmo Beaty. In the longevity category, this one will go to Sikma, as Beaty didn't have as long of a career, and in fact, much like Rick Barry, sat out an entire season of his prime because he wanted to play in the ABA, which affected his career and longevity. Sikma, meanwhile, had productive stints with the Supersonics and the Milwaukee Bucks, thus this category will go to him. So when all the categories are summed up, Zelmo Beaty takes the scoring efficiency awards and playoffs categories, while Jack Sikma takes the passing defense and totals categories, with only rebounding being a tie, giving Zelmo Beaty the edge. Jack Sikma is an underrated player today as he played for the late 70s Seattle Supersonics dynasty, a championship squad which is not well remembered today because, like the 2004 Pistons, it didn't feature any players who were dominating superstars. Sikma, along with Dennis Johnson and Gus Williams, were all underrated stars who never got as much attention as the bigger stars in the league. Zelmo Beaty is today a forgotten player since he played in the 1960s and in the ABA, and wasn't quite as dominant as his contemporaries Wilt Russell or Baylor. However, he was a Hall of Fame level center who could score, rebound, and lead a team to the championship as we saw on the Utah Stars, an ABA team that is mostly forgotten now as it did not have any successor in the NBA, and the Utah Jazz does not honor any Utah Stars players, unfortunately. So Zelmo Beaty, Willie Wise, Donnie Freeman, Ron Boone, and other Utah Stars players became forgotten to all but NBA historians like me. Hope you guys enjoyed this comparison. Hope you guys learned something new. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.